Guys, I am finally glad I was able to get this Monster Hunter Rise review out. Finally! After all my problems with data corruption for my game save, I thought I was pretty much in a bunch of dog doo-doo and I was screwed. But fortunately, the good news was my review footage was able to be saved on my PlayStation hard drive. So, good news there, my review footage got saved and was not corrupted. So I was able to get this review out much sooner than I expected. So with that out of the way, I decided to change my avatar just for this one review for today. So let's get on with this review. Is Monster Hunter Rise still good in 2023? Let's find out. So I want to try to get the bad stuff out of the way first before I go on to the good stuff. So Monster Hunter Rise, it's pretty much, there's like no story here. At least until DLC comes out with the Sunbreak DLC. There's pretty much like no story here. And it's one of the most repetitive games to this date. So pretty much the way this works is you either see one of the quest maidens or the quest counter ladies, Hinoa or Minoto, and you choose a quest, which you select a list of which monster you want to hunt, and you, for example, and you go to that certain area. And once you go to that area, you can either explore, collect loot by killing other monsters to carve parts for your gear later in the game. And once you find your target monster that you set out to hunt originally, once you take on that monster and eventually kill it, the quest will complete, and then you go back to the village, and then you repeat the cycle over. This is one of the most repetitive games to date. I mean, it makes sense because the game is called Monster Hunter, and it literally is about hunting monsters. And this is something that Evolved was trying to be. You all remember that forgettable game back in like 2015 where there was 4 hunters with guns against one scary monster? This is something Evolved back in 2015 was trying to become, and it unfortunately failed. But Monster Hunter Rise puts Evolved to shame. Hell, I would argue to say that it puts Dauntless to shame, even though Dauntless is literally a spin-off version of Monster Hunter, but this game is by far a great game, and I understand it's not everyone's cup of tea and can get a bit confusing with the controls from time to time, but after you played the game for a while, it seems to get more easier as you played the game. Now, what about your companions, like your cat and dog? Well, when you start out the game, when you finish making your character, you can make your companions. The newest one in Monster Hunter is called a Palamute, aka your dog, and you get to do so much customization with your pets in this game, from animal coats to the eyes, the tails, the ear, the little clothing on them, the little voices. It's so well done. And your cat, aka your Palico, which is your cat, you get to do the same thing. Customize their tail, the ear, their fur color. Like, the customization is so deep. Even with just your base character you play as, the hunter, or if you want to edit your cats, like, there is so much customization to your characters here. And I absolutely love this kind of stuff. The amount of customization is so deep here. You can literally make your companions that you've always wanted. Always wanted to see a badass cat? You can make that. You want to see a badass dog? You can make that. And your cats actually have a playstyle role, like a support class. They can be an assist trapper, a healer, a bombardier, for example. They could be a fighter or even a gatherer class that gathers resources from monsters. And if you don't like the way that you have your cat or your dog the first time you customize them, you can go to Lori in the Buddy Plaza and he can scout you another buddy and you can choose a very specific buddy that you want, either by default or you can make your own. And it's so well done! So if you don't like your current companion that you have with you, your pet cat or dog, you can go see Lori and he'll change it up for you. Either you get a random pet or you can customize your own and he'll search for you when you're out on a quest, which is amazing. Well done, Capcom. Well done with the customization, and this is clearly well thought out as well. So, what's next on the list? What about the weapon classes? Well, there's 14 different types of weapons to choose from melee weapons, and you get ranged weapons as well. And each weapon has a unique playstyle depending on what your playstyle is. Either you can be aggressive with the hammer and you can go in with the sword and shield and dual blades, or you can play it from a safe distance using a ranged weapon like a bow and arrow, for example. Or you could be a support role and use the hunting horn. So, I'm going to go into depth as best as I can, and I'm going to go through each and every single weapon, and I'm going to try my best to explain how each weapon works, and I'm going to rate them between 1 out of 5 for a rating. Starting off this list, we're going to start off with the Greatsword. And oh boy, did I ever underestimate this weapon. This is definitely a big boy sword, only for big boys, someone like Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy would use. And holy mackerel, does this weapon do a boatload of damage. So pretty much, the Great Sword is fantastic for not only cutting off the monster's tail, but if you use it very correctly and position it well, you can also knock the monster unconscious, knocking him on the ground. Although this does do a lot of damage, I don't like how slow it is, but it does still get the job done. The Greatsword gets a 3 out of 5. It's a great weapon, but it's a little slow for my liking. Up next, we have the classic good old Sword and Shield. Holy mackerel. Talk about great weapon classes. The Sword and Shield, in my honest opinion, is probably the best class, if not the greatest starting class in the game, in my opinion. Not only do you get to use your shield to bash it into the monster's face, stunning him briefly, but with a wire bug combo that you perform with the sword, you throw it around your character like you're throwing it as a whip, and you do a boatload of damage to the monster. This is a fantastic weapon. The Sword and Shield gets a 5 out of 5 rating. Next up, we have the good old Lance weapon. I don't know what it is with the Lance, but it just seems very underwhelming and it's just not as viable as it seems. Although it does have the best defense in the entire game next to the gun lance, this weapon just unfortunately just seems to be overshadowed by the sword and shield, the hammer, and the long sword. Now, it does have some great defensive value, but I think I would prefer to use the gun lance. The regular lance gets a 2 out of 5. It may have some of the best defense in the game, but it just underperforms for my liking, personally. Up next, we got the hammer. Jesus Christ. You think the Great Sword is a weapon of destruction? Holy mackerel, did I ever underestimate the hammer. The hammer is probably the most deadliest weapon, if not the best weapon for dealing damage to the monster in the entire game. I know I said this for the sword and shield and the great sword, but the hammer is a monster's worst nightmare. If you want to stun the monster like crazy, go with the hammer. You want a lot of stun power or try to stagger the monster, go with the hammer. You want to do a crazy amount of damage, go with the hammer. The hammer is honestly the monster's worst nightmare, and this is a literal weapon of destruction. The hammer gets a 5 out of 5. It is going to be your best friend. Next up on the list, we got the Switch Axe. Now, surprisingly, the Switch Axe has really been growing on me as of lately, as I've been playing the game. Whether it be on my PlayStation or my Nintendo Switch, the Switch Axe is surprisingly a good weapon to use. Especially because you can choose between axe form and you can choose between sword form. But in sword form, you get to deal extra damage to the monster, and as you fill up the gauge in axe form, you get to build up the weapon gauge, and once it's fully charged, you get to mount the monster by thrusting the sword onto the monster, and you get to deal a bunch of damage. Honestly, the Switch Axe is a fun weapon to use, but it definitely can have its downsides. The Switch Axe gets a 3 out of 5. The Switch Axe is definitely a good weapon, but I can see it being outclassed by the Sword and Shield and the Dual Blades, honestly. Up next, we have the Insect Glaive. Now, this is definitely a hit or miss with the Monster Hunter community. Either you're a new player trying to learn the weapon and you can't get the hang of it and you'll hate it, or you're a professional that knows what you're doing with the Insect Glaive and you have the right builds for it. Now, this is personally one of my favorite weapons in the entire game, but it's definitely got a bit of a learning curve to it. It's definitely an all-rounder type of weapon, in my opinion, that can be used as a range weapon, or it can be used as a melee weapon. So let me explain this as easy as possible. It comes with 3 buffs. The first buff is attack power, which increases your damage and you get to perform extra attacks. The second buff, which is speed, which increases your movement speed. And the third buff is knockback resistance, which makes you more resilient to the monster's attacks. And with all 3 buffs active, you have monster shout resistance. Now, it's definitely a complicated weapon to use, but if you give the Insect Glaive to the right person, it becomes a tool of destruction you should not underestimate. The Insect Glaive gets a 4 out of 5. Now, I'm going to be rating the heavy bowgun, the light bowgun, and the bow and arrow all together and give them the same rating. Now, I don't know what it is with the ranged weapons in Monster Hunter, but they all just seem too safe to play, especially the way that their playstyles work. Now, the heavy bowgun is supposed to have more defensive capabilities in my time with this weapon, especially because you get to counterattack with wire bugs and you get to deal a bunch of damage to the monster if you time your counter with the heavy bowgun perfectly. And we have the light bow gun, which has more maneuverability than the bow and the heavy bow gun. Personally, I prefer to use the light bow gun just because it has more viability and it has more versatility than the other two. And it definitely does get the job done if you know what you're doing. And then we have the bow and arrow, which I personally suck with, but it's still a great weapon to use, especially because you do get the not only dodge, but you get to deal damage while dodging with the bow and arrow. Although the ranged weapons seem too safe, I just don't see myself using them as often. The ranged weapons all get a 3 out of 5 rating. Up next, we got the broken ass longsword. Now, I don't know what it is with this weapon, but apparently the Monster Hunter community, at least from what I understand, they all say that the longsword is busted. And I can think of a couple reasons why, but I'm going to try to explain as best as I can. Not only does it do a good amount of damage, but it does put a lot of pressure on the monster, and apparently you can fill up its weapon gauge for free if you know what you're doing with pretty much the what your play style, and the weapon just does so much overall damage. It can out outdamage pretty much the dual blades, and it can outdamage the heavy weapons like the great sword and the hammer. And apparently, to make this even more busted, if you use wire bugs or if you try to do a counterattack with the weapon, it apparently defends better than the goddamn lance and gun lance combined. This is not right. Something is seriously broken with this weapon in a good way. It may be one of the best weapons, but holy mackerel is this thing like completely busted. The long sword, in my opinion, gets a goddamn busted rating out of 5. It is too overpowered, and if you have the right build for it, and if you know what you're doing, this weapon becomes the monster's worst nightmare. Holy mackerel. Up next, we got the good old dual blades. Now, this is probably the most funnest weapon to use in the entire game. Although it doesn't do that much damage by itself, it does have a very quick attack speed. And if you're in Demon Ford, you get to unleash a bunch of attacks that deal damage in rapid succession. Although the weapon isn't as viable as to other classes, I still think the dual blades are pretty fun. The dual blades get a 3 out of 5 rating. Hey, you! Yeah, you! Person watching this video! Do you wish that your old lance got to shoot bullets at the monster and exploding spears? Introducing the Gun Lance! Holy mackerel, this is one of the most funnest weapons I ever got to use in the entire game. And this is probably my most favorite weapon next to the Insect Glaive and the Sword and Shield. And it has just as much good defensive capabilities as the lance if you can time it correctly. Personally, I'm not good with defending with the lance or the gun lance, but the damage output on the gun lance with wire bugs, holy mackerel, they're good. And the special attack, the Wyvern Blast, if used correctly, it definitely can give the monster a massive headache and a massive ouchie. It's a great weapon. And it does have an exploding spear that does a boatload of damage. This weapon gets a 5 out of 5. Okay, look. I understand certain games of this caliber need a support class. And I understand the Hunting Horn is supposed to fill that role. And it's supposed to be good? But I'm sorry, but I don't care. I don't care about the Hunting Horn. I never liked the Hunting Horn. I don't give a damn about the Hunting Horn. I don't give a cat or a dog's ass about this weapon. So, to sum it up very quickly, it's supposed to be the support weapon that's supposed to heal your nearby teammates and give your teammates buffs. The less said about the Hunting Horn, the better. This weapon sucks, don't use it. The Hunting Horn gets a 1 out of 5. It's a terrible weapon. And last but not least, we have the Charge Blade. So pretty much the Charge Blade is literally someone taking a sword and combining it with a saw blade, that's a shield, put it together and you have the Charge Blade. So pretty much you can fill up the weapon's flask by attacking the monster with the Charge Blade, and if you have enough charge on it, you can deal a lot of damage to the monster. Holy mackerel, is this thing a tool of destruction if you know how to use it. While I'm terrible using this weapon, it still does get the job done. The Charge Blade gets a 3 out of 5 rating. It's a good overall weapon. So, what do we have next? We have your standard hunting missions, where you can choose to free roam, if you choose, or kill the monster to complete the quest. We have the customization for your pets. We have your 14 weapon classes, depending on your playstyle. We also have a thing called Rampage Missions, which is kind of a hit or miss. And Rampage Missions, just look at it as like a tower defense minigame. Like if you're playing Balloon Tower Defense. Now, if you tell me about Rampage Missions, if you tell me Rampage Missions is a thing that you love or you hate, they're both completely valid answers. I personally think Rampage Missions on paper, it sounds amazing. But in execution, it's completely bullcrap. So, the way this works is you have a set amount of time to defend your stronghold and get your defenses ready. And as you progress through your rampage missions, you'll unlock more defenses. And as you level up your stronghold throughout the rampage mission, you'll be able to unlock powerful defenses and upgrade your current defenses, such as you'll upgrade your ballistas to do more damage, or you can unlock a cannon or a machine gun, for example, and they do more damage than other tower defenses, which are pretty awesome. And to make matters even better, you can also call in people like Elder Fugen or the twins to help you out attack these monsters. You can also get help from Usushi, Yomogi. There's so much defensive strategies you can do with this minigame. But however, it's stupid because the way it works is every time when you knock out a monster, they do not drop monster materials. Every time you knock out a monster, they only drop rampage materials such as ice bombs or barrel bombs, and to make matters worse, you don't even get monster parts from knocking out these monsters. The only time you get monster parts is by taking out the final major threat of the Rampage mission. That's the only monster you get to take monster parts from. For example, if you try to go for an Izuchi or Acnosome, which is the final major threat, for example, and you'd kill it, the Rampage mission ends, and you only get monster parts for killing that certain monster, which is completely bullcrap and completely stupid. This sounds like an amazing minigame on paper, but in execution, it just needs a serious rework. So, besides all that, besides from the repetitive gameplay, and besides from the frustrating but interesting rampage missions, and besides from the 14 different weapon classes you can choose from, and the amazing buddy customization, Monster Hunter Rise, it definitely is a repetitive game, and if you're not really into these repetitive or grindy kind of games, then that's fine. I understand. You don't need to play it. But it's definitely a fun game. I personally think everybody should give a try. It's definitely a fun game, personally, and you can play this game with your friends, and it's definitely a lot of fun, and it makes your hunts much easier if you play this with your friends. So, the final score for Monster Hunter Rise would have been a 9 or an 8 out of 10. But despite from the non-existent story that we have in the base game, and we had to wait for DLC for Sunbreak, which is available now, it just makes the base game feel like it's less valuable. But if you do have the Sunbreak DLC, which makes the game amazing, and there's an actual story there, it makes the game fantastic. I mean, even just the base game alone, it's still pretty good, but I honestly wouldn't recommend Sunbreak if you're not really into these kind of games. If you're not really into the grindy, repetitive games, then I would recommend you try to avoid the Sunbreak DLC and just play Monster Hunter for the sake of Monster Hunter. So, the final score for Monster Hunter Rise is a solid 7 out of 10. The game is fantastic. It may be repetitive, but you get to do so much here. You can actually customize your buddies. If you don't like the way your buddy looks, or you don't like their playstyle, you can change them at the buddy plaza. You can change up your weapons. You can get better gear as you play the game. And the gear and all the weapons are pretty amazing. And honestly, this may be a repetitive game, but it's definitely, in my opinion, a gem for today's date in modern gaming. So I would recommend, if you haven't tried this game before, or any Monster Hunter game, give this one a try. So, with this being said, thank you guys all for listening. I'm sorry that this review took so long. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get this out sooner than later, but thank you guys all for listening. I apologize for the delay of this review. So, with this being said, thank you guys all for watching and for listening. And until next time, you guys, I will see you all later.